A hot topic in society for sure. Now, Brian and Brian, you guys know the drill, but since this is just our second show, let me briefly explain to our viewers at home exactly how tonight's show is going to work, all right? So on some episodes of the 180, those of you who joined us last month know, we actually give our debaters their position. They don't choose it. Reason for that is your job as future attorneys is going to be to fight for the side of your client, personal feelings aside, and the 180 is a form to represent that. Tonight, however, given the complexities of the legal issues that we are discussing tonight, we thought it was much more fitting and appropriate to have with us two experts in the field who are both passionate and very well versed in the sides that they represent. And so I am pleased to welcome both Brians here tonight, and we very much thank you for your time, guys. The issue, of course, is should all states legalize same-sex marriage? They will each have exactly 1 minute, to make a brief opening statement to you. Then they will respond to questions proposed by me that they have not heard prior to tonight. But then after that, they're going to face you. Get involved. Let us hear your comments on Twitter. Submit your questions in the question pod. And we will face your questions right here and take them live on the air and hear what you have to say. And if we read one of your questions alone, we're going to send you one of our coveted 180 t-shirts that Sham showed off to you just a few moments ago. One other final note before we get started, though. We realize that this topic touches on the lives of many, many people, and many people are very, very passionate about the sides with which they feel compelled to represent. Now, the 180 is a show about legal issues. It's not meant to be a show about societal issues exclusively. And we know that those two things are not necessarily completely unrelated, but our guests know and have stipulated to the facts that arguments around morality and religion are not proper for this forum that we have here tonight. There was no intent during this debate to hurt anyone or to challenge anyone or make anybody feel uncomfortable. And my role as the moderator, and one that I take very seriously, is to be impartial tonight, play devil's advocate at times very purposefully to challenge the issues, but at the same time lead an open and honest debate and discussion about the issues at hand. And I hope that you'll enjoy the ride as we take it together tonight. So guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, Brian, we're going to start with you. Your opening statement. Should all states legalize same-sex marriage?
And obviously I think the answer to that question is yes. As Jay was saying before, this issue is very personal to me. My husband and I were actually married in 2004 when we were living in Massachusetts. The very first week that you could actually go down and get a marriage license as a same-sex couple, we went down and we got our marriage license. And part of what prompted me to do that, even though at that time we had been together for about 4 years, was that I was a law student at Northeastern, and I was in a trust and estates class and was really thinking about how marriage affects my rights as a citizen in the United States. And it became very clear to me how important marriage is, and that the rights and benefits that come with marriage are critically important, and they really make a relationship stronger. And so this is a critically important issue for gays and lesbians around the country because we tie so many rights and benefits to marriage. In fact, the federal government alone provides over 1,000 rights that are contingent on whether or not you're married. And these include things like tax benefits. So obviously whether or not you file your taxes jointly or separately, that relates to your marital status. Health benefits, pension benefits, benefits on the death of an employee, all relate to whether or not you can get married. So these are critical issues. And really it's an issue of discrimination. And by discrimination I mean classifications that the government puts on people. And we've already decided in our country that classifications based on race or based on gender are not appropriate. And sexual orientation is just like race and gender in the sense that people that are gay and lesbian are minorities. And we have faced a history of discrimination that we are rapidly overcoming in this country. But the reality is that we are still barred from those rights and benefits that come with marriage. And so it's important for both the courts and for the legislature to step in and extend equal marriage benefits and rights to same-sex couples.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And apologies if it was Brian back and forth tonight. I'll do my best to differentiate. Brian Brown from NOM, your opening statement. Should states legalize same-sex marriage?
Well, I would quibble with the way you asked the question. The idea of legalizing same-sex marriage takes for granted the notion that there is something called same-sex marriage, and that right now somehow if people enter into a same-sex marriage in their church, that somehow the state is going to be involved in saying, no, you can't do that, or even possibly some sort of penalty. That's not the case. If two people in their religious organization, their church, decide to have a religious ceremony, they can do that. Instead, I would ask the question, should states redefine marriage. States should not redefine marriage. Marriage is some intrinsic thing. It's not a fungible thing that can be changed with a matter of the law. It exists before the state. It exists in cultures that are very different than our own. And what it takes to have a marriage is at least one man and one woman. In cultures that differ in religious background, vastly different in political organizations, all agree that this is what a marriage is. And the reason is pretty simple. The marriage idea is the idea that a man and a woman coming together in this union is something unique and special. And no other union, however loving it may be, is the equivalent. The idea put forward by those that want to redefine marriage is that two men or two women coming together in a union are the exact same thing as a man and woman coming together in marriage, and that those of us who disagree are somehow discriminating or bigoted. You take that idea, you put it into the law, there are profound consequences. And hopefully tonight I can talk about some of those consequences. And those who say that, look, this doesn't affect me, it doesn't affect you, I hope they'll see that it actually does. It affects our society, and at the very least, you have to accept that there are profound consequences for religious liberty and for the freedom of individuals to for associations, et cetera, et cetera.
And we're going to explore a lot of those issues tonight. Brian, let's just start to make sure we're all on the same page and understand the basics of the history of sort of how we got to today. Can you first tell us about the Defense of Marriage Act, exactly what it is and what it did and when it was passed, et cetera?
Well, there are two parts to the Defense of Marriage Act. It was passed in 1996. It was passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support. Then President Bill Clinton signed it into law. And what it says, two things. Under federal law, marriage is the union of a man and a woman, and that states can't be forced to recognize same-sex marriages that occur in those few states that now have same-sex marriage. So that basically ensures that a state like California now, or states, the 31 states that have passed state constitutional amendments defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman, that you won't have a same-sex marriage occur in Massachusetts and then a lawsuit taken to one of these states, and that you could immediately overturn those state laws. DOMA protects that, and obviously there is a move to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act now in Congress. I don't think that's going to get anywhere, but what we are seeing is that as supporters of same-sex marriage have lost at the ballot box, they've increasingly turned to the courts. So we have a number of court challenges to DOMA and an additional court challenge to Proposition 8 in California.
Okay. I have a chart that is on the screen right now. I know you guys can see this in a moment, but this is actually showing sort of the lay of the land right now, and of the 50 states in the country, what is the current status quo with regard to this issue. And as folks can see right now, the states you see in red, the predominance of the states in the country, those are states in which same-sex marriage is banned. The states that you see in blue are 6 states that tell you where there is full marriage rights for same-sex couples. The states you're seeing in green, inclusive of Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, Illinois, these are states in which civil unions or the equivalent are legalized in those states. And the states in yellow, New York inclusive, are states in which same-sex marriages are recognized as valid, however, that there are no same-sex marriages to be performed in that state or civil unions. Am I characterizing that correctly? Is that fair?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
The majority of states do not permit same-sex couples to marry, but there certainly is a move afoot in many states that are currently in red in order to extend same-sex, or the right to marriage to same-sex couples. And obviously, as Brian said, there is certainly an aggressive move afoot to repeal or overturn Section 3 of DOMA, which, as Brian said, is the portion of the law that prohibits the federal government from recognizing same-sex marriages. And that's really the most critical part of the law in many regards.
So big news last month came out. I'm looking at a Washington Post article dated February 24th. In gay rights victory, Obama administration won't defend the Defense of Marriage Act. The Obama administration said Wednesday that it will no longer defend the federal law that bans recognition of same-sex marriages because it considers the legislation unconstitutional. Brian, what does this mean? I know you've just actually written an article about that.
Well,
it's tough to conceptualize, I'm sure, in a few words. But
the reality is that the Obama administration decision alone doesn't do very much. The reality is the federal government is not going out and extending rights and benefits to married couples. So if you're married in Massachusetts and you live in Massachusetts, the federal government isn't going out and recognizing your marriage and providing you the rights and benefits. But what's really significant about President Obama's decision is that the Attorney General and the Department of Justice has now recognized and stated in a letter to Congress that sexual orientation is entitled to heightened scrutiny, essentially intermediate scrutiny, which is the same level of scrutiny that applies to gender, which makes it much more difficult to find laws that classify based on sexual orientation to be constitutional. So it has far-reaching ramifications, not only for DOMA, but also for marriage equality.
Brian, this is at its heart sort of a states' rights issue, right? I mean, states have the authority to declare statutes as they see fit. So I'm curious, we all think as prospective lawyers and even law students that the Supreme Court is the lay of the land, and what they kind of say goes. Can the Supreme Court have any authority to interject its opinion in the process at all? How do they come into play?
Well, I think that you have obviously two different levels. You have federal law and you have state law, and I wouldn't say this is only a states' rights question. The notion that the federal government hasn't been involved in marriage historically is just false. States could not become members of the United States, were not granted statehood until they agreed under the Enabling Act that they would not have polygamy. So the federal government was quite involved in marriage very early on. As far as the Supreme Court goes, what we're seeing now is obviously all of these cases are on a trajectory to head to the Supreme Court. But the cases are somewhat contradictory. On one hand, you have in California the attempt to overturn Proposition 8, which was passed by the voters of California, and a claim is being made that there's a U.S. constitutional right to same-sex marriage. So on one hand, you have a federalist attempt to not only force same-sex marriage on California, but all of the states that have passed marriage amendments. On the other, you have this argument being made in the attempts to repeal DOMA, saying that states have the right to redefine marriage, states have the right to pass same-sex marriage, and that other states should be forced to recognize those. So you have both the states' rights argument occurring on the DOMA in the DOMA's cases, and you have this argument that the U.S. Constitution requires same-sex marriage under equal protection grounds in the Perry case.
And let me just respond to that. That's a misinterpretation of the cases that are pending challenging DOMA. The cases, there are three of them primarily. There's one in Massachusetts, one in Connecticut, and one in the Southern District of New York. And all three cases challenge only Section 3 of DOMA, which is the section that determines whether or not the federal government is recognizing marriage rights that have been conferred by the state. So they're very specific, very targeted lawsuits. And the reality is that the federal government has never played a role in determining what factors are required in order to get married. The states have always controlled marriage and have always set the parameters, and those parameters have always differed from state to state. And the federal government has always recognized a couple that is married in one state. But states, as I said, do have different parameters. And the reality is that one state is not required to recognize a marriage performed in another state. And there have always been circumstances where that has not happened. And that is not an issue that is before the courts right now. And that's really not the part of DOMA that's being challenged.
Brian, let me ask this question. What's the difference between a marriage and a civil union?
Well, it depends on what state. I mean, we tend to talk about civil unions as if they're one monolithic thing, but civil unions can differ from state to state. It's just a term we've created for something short of marriage, and in some states you have civil unions that would only be conferred to same-sex couples, and in other states both man and a woman, man and man, woman and woman can all enter into civil unions. So in states that have the broadest possible definition of civil unions, under that state law, they would in almost every way be identical to marriage. Now, under federal law, they would not because of DOMA. And again, I have to beg to differ. The notion that somehow the federal government has not been involved in marriage is just factually wrong. It has been involved in marriage. The Utah Enabling Act, on and on and on. Supreme Court cases talk about marriage. And that's why this is so critical. What folks that want same-sex marriage are asking for, they talk about rights, benefits, and privileges. But in most states where civil unions or reciprocal beneficiaries type arrangements have been put forward, they oppose them. Why? Well, you've got to take the argument seriously. They truly believe that there is no difference between opposite and same-sex couples, and therefore civil unions are, in their view, in the Supreme Court of Connecticut's view, inherently discriminatory. So if this was about rights and benefits, then civil unions, I think, would be acceptable. They're not, because this is about the notion that somehow those of us that believe that marriage is the union of a man and a woman are ourselves discriminating. We're going against civil rights, in your own words. And the fact is, the American people do not accept that. The African American community overwhelmingly rejects the notion that the push for same-sex marriage is the same thing as the civil rights movement. And they've voted that way in the ballot box by, depending on the figures, 60 to 70%. So I don't think that this civil rights argument holds up.
Let me ask this question. We're looking at the map again, if you can pull it up one more time, and I'm looking at Iowa and Illinois. Iowa is a state with full marriage rights, full benefits to same-sex couples. Illinois is a state in which there's civil unions that are allowed. What are the rights that are attributable to those in Iowa versus those in Illinois? Can you tell me what the difference would be?
Well, I have to admit, I haven't studied the civil union legislation in Illinois, so I'm not certain as to the specific differences between the two. But assuming that they extend all of the rights in the civil union law that you would have if you were married, what's different is the name. And I think the reality is that marriage has a tradition. Marriage itself is a fundamental right, as the U.S. Supreme Court declared in Loving versus Virginia. And same-sex couples don't want to redefine marriage. We want to enter into the same loving, committed relationship that opposite-sex couples enter into. And we have the same relationships. We have the same feelings for our partners. And we want to be part of that institution. I think that makes the institution of marriage much stronger. And part of what has made marriage so strong is the fact that it changes over time. I mean, for example, men don't consider women to be their property. Coverture was overturned. African Americans have been permitted to marry whites. Obviously, that was something that was disputed at one point in time. Marriage has grown and evolved, and it's an institution that has longevity. And the American dream is to get married and have kids and have a good job and be able to retire one day. It's not to have a civil union. You don't grow up as a kid thinking, oh, I'm 10 years old, I can't, someday I want to get together and have a civil union. You think, I want to get married, because marriage is an important institution and has an actual place in our society. And civil unions are a new classification that are created simply to keep same-sex couples from entering into marriage.
This is one of the classic arguments. We saw this in the Proposition 8 case and the arguments before Von Walker, that just doesn't hold up to even just a cursory scrutiny. I mean, the notion that you would use changes to marriage, extrinsic characteristics of marriage, for example, race. Race has nothing to do with the nature of marriage. A man and a woman do. And a state that puts race up over the top of marriage and makes that a qualification is itself hurting the true nature of marriage. So to say that these extra qualities of marriage, because they've changed and because obviously we've improved, that somehow that is at all analogous to the intrinsic quality of what marriage is, which is by its very nature the union of one man and one woman, is comparing apples to oranges. And I do not accept that those millions of voters who've gone to the ballot box in places that are not known as red states like California and Maine were being motivated by animus towards gays or hatred or attacking anyone's civil rights. They weren't. They know that there's a truth to marriage, that marriage is based upon a profound and beautiful good, and that is that men and women are different, mothers and fathers are different, and that marriage is the way that we connect mothers and fathers to the next generation. It's the only type of union. Only men and women can naturally bear children, and those children be connected with their mother and father. That's a uniqueness in marriage that other relationships don't have.
So 31 states have a ban on same-sex marriage, or constitutional amendments that say that same-sex marriage is not allowed in the state. So if there is any federal reform, how does that come into play when we have states that have same-sex marriage constitutional amendments?
Well, I mean, really, any federal reform or the repeal of Section 3 of DOMA really has no impact on the states. The reality is that states define marriage laws, they determine the qualifications or eligibility for marriage, and those are what they are, and they're not required to change based on the federal government. We're not asking the federal government to change the qualifications for marriage or to set forth one specific marriage standard or qualification. It's never been legislation that's been proposed in Congress, and in fact, the only time legislation proposed in Congress to establish criteria is the Defense of Marriage Act in '96.
All right. So we know where we are, where we have been. We know where we are today. The next question becomes is where are we going next? And we're going to do that right after a short break. The map you're seeing was in 2004, all red. What should it look like in 2014? Before we get back into it, let's check over with Sam at the tweet couch. Sam, what's going on Twitter?
Hey, Jay.
Hey, Sam.
Hi, Jay. We have a lot of great commentary coming through, a lot of great tweets, so thanks to everyone who's tweeting along with us. The first tweet I'm going to read is from Sing True. He asks, should tax benefits for married couples then be banned as well, or differently regulated by states?
You want to take that?
Well, actually, it's an interesting question because one of the things that's emerged out of this debate is that those that consider themselves more libertarian have posited this notion that why don't we just abolish marriage altogether? Why does the state get involved in marriage at all? There are many close relationships that we have, and the state's not a part of them. This is the one relationship in which the state is a part. And my answer to that is because this is a relationship that is profoundly important to the state, different than all other relationships. And I think it would be a very bad idea to not have the state, at least through lifting marriage up in both law and in culture. I think that that's important for the state to do, and I support it. I think it would be a bad move to abolish marriage.
I think the point I would add to that is that the fact that the federal government does not recognize married couples that are married because they're of the same sex does create a lot of problems for the state, which is why Massachusetts sued the United States challenging DOMA, because Massachusetts is losing out on essentially millions of dollars they've claimed because they provide certain benefits to their citizens based on marriage status. So, for example, health benefits. Massachusetts has a health care law, and they recognize same-sex couples that are married, and they provide health benefits to them based on their status of marriage, but the federal government doesn't recognize it, and so they don't reimburse Massachusetts the same way. It creates a lot of problems for the states, and we really need the federal government to step in and recognize these relationships so the states can properly handle their citizens.
Brian, let me give you a hypothetical here if I can. So New Jersey, state just south of here, or west, I guess, depending on how you define the geography these days, right? They have legalized medical marijuana, right? So let's just say one weekend I go down to the Jersey Shore, I pick up a couple ounces of pot. I think 2 ounces is the legal limit, right? And I do so legally, all right? Somehow I bring it back to New York State. I drive across the George Washington Bridge. I come into New York City. I get pulled over for speeding, whatever it is. I get arrested. I get thrown down in the tubes in Lower Manhattan because I have an illegal substance on me, right? No one will really bat an eye at that fact, right? I've gone ahead and I violated a New York State statute, even though I did something legal that was in New Jersey. Now, New Jersey has civil unions, right? I go to New Jersey, or a same-sex couple goes to New Jersey, has a civil union. Then they go to Pennsylvania, the city of Philadelphia, city of brotherly love, ironically, right? There is seemingly a great movement afoot to try to get states such as Pennsylvania to go ahead and honor what is essentially a New Jersey law and therefore turn over their own. What's the difference between the drug scenario and the scenario of the same-sex civil union?
Well, I think with the drug scenario, you can plan because you know what the law is in New York. I think the challenge with being married and not having your marriage recognized wherever you travel is that you never know where you're going to get sick. You never know where your car is going to break down. I mean, there are stories of couples being married in Massachusetts. They go to Florida. They're going to take a cruise. They get sick in Florida, and suddenly they can't see their spouse in the emergency room. Even though, in some of these situations, they're married because they find themselves in a state that doesn't recognize the relationship. And that presents a whole series of challenges that maybe some you can plan for and some you can't. But obviously it requires same-sex couples to go out, hire an attorney, and spend thousands of dollars to prepare additional documents in addition to their marriage license in order to enable them to bring certain rights and benefits with them that protect their families. And that creates a real challenge for same-sex couples.
Okay. Brian, let me ask you this for a second. Let's talk grammar for a moment. Can marriage, is it possible that the word can have more than one definition? Right, so similarly, it can have one particular religious connotation to it, but at the same time mean something else in the eyes of the law?
Well, obviously there are different interpretations of what marriage is on the margins. Different states have different qualifications as far as age, consanguinity. So states have the ability to, on the margins, have different definitions, but I wouldn't call those different definitions. I would say that the state itself has different limits as to who and can and cannot marry. But in each of those states and throughout human history, the one constant is, as I said earlier, marriage takes at least one man and one woman. So when you change that, you're creating something totally different. It's not marriage. Marriage is by its nature that thing that binds men and women together that states and cultures have recognized throughout human history. And that's why we say you're redefining marriage. Those that say, well, no, this is about love and respect. Well, two people can love and respect each other without being in a marriage, but they have a real difficult argument, and that is that what if there are 3, 4, or 5 people that say we love and respect each other, and we want the benefits of marriage? People laugh and say, oh, no, we wouldn't do that. Well, polygamy has been a relatively normal human variation of marriage, so to say that we would never do that I think is a bit odd. And scholars in Beyond Marriage, a number of scholars came together, and they argued this very thing, that 3, 4, or 5 people should be able to get married. If you change the nature of what marriage is, if you say marriage is about what I want, the fact that my relationship needs to be just as respected as yours, then you have no means by which you stop the total deconstruction of marriage, because marriage is the union of one man and one woman.
So, Brian, if the issue is really about equal treatment, is marriage really necessary, or are civil unions enough, assuming they afford the full rights and benefits as married couples?
Well, as I said marriage has a history and a tradition. And as Brian keeps saying, marriage itself is a great institution, and it's an institution that is considered by the United States Supreme Court to be a fundamental right, that American citizens have a fundamental right to get married. and to marry the person who they love. And clearly the question is over definition. And Brian says that the core of marriage is one man and one woman. But again, at one time, the concept of marriage was that one man and one woman became one because the woman became the man's property. That's not, our society has grown and changed to the point where women have equal rights in marriage. Coverture was obviously removed many, many years ago. And people made the same arguments back then about coverture that are made now about permitting same-sex couples to get married. People made the same arguments about permitting races to mix in marriage that are being used today to challenge same-sex couples. The reality is that the core of marriage is love, and same-sex couples are perfectly capable of raising children, and that is medical fact. I mean, there are numerous medical associations that say that same-sex couples make perfectly good parents, and very few courts, if any, have recognized that procreation is the core of marriage. I don't recall ever seeing a case where the court said the definition of marriage is the ability to procreate, because if that was the key, we wouldn't permit people over a certain age to get married.
Well, again, these are a number of red herrings. Anyone can look at the history of anti-miscegenation laws and realize that, again, you're comparing apples to oranges. Those laws in those states that tried to keep the races apart were just about that. They were about keeping the races apart. Marriage is about bringing the sexes together. And that's why in the debates, what you're saying didn't actually happen. There was an attempt by the state to stop black and white couples from marrying. Once married, in most of those states, that was recognized. So it wasn't as though the state said, by definition, you could never marry. What the state was trying to do was to keep the races apart. That was fundamentally wrong. We've progressed, luckily, beyond that. But what you're attempting to do is not to overcome this, in my view, attack on marriage by making race something that stops men and women from coming together. You're redefining the fundamental nature of what marriage is. And again, there are consequences to that. There are consequences to religious liberty. The fact that we see when you put this idea into the law that people like me are treated like second-class citizens in our organizations. We just had a high court in Britain tell Owen and Eustace Johns that they couldn't be foster parents because they were teaching the children that they were fostering their Christian morality, the idea that you grow up and marry a man and a woman. And what happened is the court came in and said, that's bigoted, you're discriminating, and our anti-discrimination laws are stronger than religious liberty laws. We see this time and time again when Catholic Charities in Boston essentially put out of business not being able to foster children because it's told it's discriminating because it will only place children with opposite-sex couples. Ocean Grove Methodist Association, we see a religious organization lose part of its state tax exemption because it wouldn't allow a pavilion it owned to be used for a same-sex union ceremony. When you put this new idea into law that it is discrimination to believe that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, there are consequences, and it is a direct threat to religious liberty. And the folks out there that are concerned about civil rights, concerned about religious liberty, look at these examples.
So there's a list of benefits of marriage or civil unions or government-recognized partnership that I'm going to take off of the HRC's website for a second. I want to just go ahead and list these off for you, as a couple of them that you identify. Hospital visitation rights, family leave to care for the ill from employment situations, health insurance coverage, financial benefits including Social Security, tax and pension benefits, immigration sponsorship for marriages that might happen overseas, etc. Let me ask this question. For some of these, are there not financial costs associated with them? And then secondly, how well would America be prepared for sweeping reform?
Well, I think it depends on how you define sweeping reform. But
Sure.
I think first of all, the fiscal note attached to marriage laws typically has been positive. Most states actually make money by permitting same-sex couples to marry. I mean, there have been numerous articles in Connecticut reporting increased income to the state because they are permitting same-sex couples to marry. So I think the reality is that this is not an issue of what is the cost financially to the government, because there is no cost, and in fact, the financial benefit is likely to be significant for the government.
All right.
And just to address your other point, the poll just a few weeks ago that came out, an ABC Washington Post poll, showed for the first time that the majority of Americans now support same-sex marriage at 54%. So I think America is far more ready for this than some people would like to think.
All right. So you've heard both sides of the issue. Now we want to know what you think. Show us your 180. Visit the 180 link on our Facebook page, Kaplan LSAT, and submit a video response in our monthly Show Us Your 180 contest. Record a video, 180 seconds or less, that's 3 minutes, giving us your best argument around tonight's issue. Should all states legalize same-sex marriage? The LSAT team at Kaplan will judge all submissions. You will not be judged on your position, but on the cohesiveness of your argument and the creativity of your submission. We're going to post our finalists online. Then you guys are going to vote for the winner. The winner is going to receive a Black's Law Dictionary, a 180 t-shirt, and $180 in cash, and so lots of great prizes to win. All submissions must be posted no later than Monday, April 18th. The finalists will be selected on Tuesday, April 19th, with the winners announced on next month's episode of the 180. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we go live to a 180 viewing party in San Francisco, plus your tweets, some of your questions, lots to do. But first, it's time to announce the winner of last month's Show Us Your 180 contest. Last month, we asked you to debate Four Loko. Was the FDA right to step in and ban the alcohol-infused energy drink in its former state? You submitted your videos, and you voted for our winner. And here it is. Richard Mackey, a junior from the University of Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. Richard wins the t-shirt, the Black's Law Dictionary, and the cash. And we want you guys to enjoy Richard's argument during the break. See you in a few.
The FDA versus Four Loko. The FDA has no right to overrule our rights as consumers. Take into account the legal consumption of cigarettes. According to Info Research Labs, 430 to 435,000 people die each year in the United States alone from smoking cigarettes. Cigarettes have been statistically proven to be carcinogens, cancer-causing agents. Where's the FDA ban to protect our welfare here? Why is the FDA allowing me to slowly commit suicide by smoking cigarettes? Because it's my right to decide what I ingest in my body, whether it be cigarettes, water, or Four Loko. Allowed cigarette use shows the line between extremely harmful products and our rights as consumers to choose what we consume, however potentially dangerous the products may be. The FDA cannot pick and choose which products we can exercise our rights on. Our rights are our rights. Not one case has been reported in the media where just one can of Four Loko led to anyone's death. The danger comes from abuse of the product, not responsible consumption. Alcohol and caffeine is a widely consumed combination by the public. It is our right as consumers to decide what we consume. If the FDA can step in and infringe our rights as consumers, where will it stop? Will there be members of the FDA in every bar making sure no one orders Red Bull with vodka? Will there be an FDA member in every restaurant making sure no one orders steak because red meat consumption has been shown to be linked with cardiovascular disease? Four Loko offered 7 warnings about alcohol on its can in large font, even including warnings for those attempting to drink underage. The packaging explicitly stated the warnings of its content. The warning was ignored. The company is not liable for its warnings being ignored. The warnings were up to code with federal regulations. Just because the warnings were ignored does not mean the company is at fault for any type of misrepresentation. The company is not at fault for the consumer abusing their product. Cough syrup is not banned because it has the potential to be extremely dangerous when abused. If you cannot be responsible when you drink, you simply should not drink. And punishing companies for people's irresponsibility is unacceptable. Four Loko should not be banned. The FDA has no right to infringe our rights as consumers. The company is not at fault for its product being abused and used irresponsibly. My rights as a consumer are based on whether my drink is bottled or not. I can legally buy an energy drink mixed with alcohol at a bar, but is illegal if the concoction is in a can. That is Loko.
All right, nice job, Richard. Congratulations. We'll get your prize out to you right away. Right now, a group of prospective law students is gathered at the Bar Association of San Francisco, watching and participating in the debate. Let's go live via Skype to our Executive Director of Pre-Law Programs, my buddy, my boss, Howard Bell in San Fran. Howard, you there? Oh, I love it when a plan comes together. Howard, how are things going out in California? All right, we're gonna check Howard's audio for a second. Welcome to live TV, guys. But this is great. We got Howard in California. We're gonna try to go back to him in just a second. All right, can we go over to Sam and grab a couple tweets? Is that all right? We're gonna throw over to Sam. Board is ready. Yes, Sam. Good to see you.
Hey, Jay.
Sam, tell me what's going on Twitter.
Okay, so we have another comment coming through from Baycakes.
Okay.
She tweets, "Do you feel gay marriages may negatively or positively shape the minds of children?"
Gentlemen.
Well, obviously, I think that redefining marriage, one of the consequences is what's taught to children in the schools, and obviously in many of the ads that we've run in states across the country, we've highlighted the fact that you're going to change the curriculum. You're going to change what kids are taught, and parents are not going to necessarily have the right to even opt out of those classes, as in Massachusetts, because the state comes back and says, this is about teaching non-discrimination. We have same-sex marriage in Massachusetts, so of course we're going to teach about it. And I think that undermines parental rights, and it's one of the reasons, it's one of the clear consequences of same-sex marriage.
All right. I think we're going to try to go back to Howard in San Francisco. Try the audio connection again. Howard, are you there? Howard? No guy Howard. All right. Let's go back to another question, guys. We'll see if we can reconnect that. All right. Let's see. Sam, give me another tweet if we can.
Great. So journalism tweets, she says, times have changed. What once was considered traditional doesn't fall along the same guidelines anymore. What do you say to that?
I'll let the other Brian respond.
Brian?
I think that's exactly right. I think that's part of what makes our country so great, is that, in particular, it's founded on a constitution that is able to adjust and adapt to the changes that our society is going through. And I think one of the best examples is how the Supreme Court has changed its position over the years on sodomy laws. Just to see exactly how the court has grown and changed on that, I think is important. And obviously, we see this with the legislative process as well. And so I think it's important for our government to grow and change as its people do, so that it's actually reflecting the realities on the ground. And the realities now are that there are same-sex couples in all 50 states, many of them raising kids, and it's important that they have the rights and benefits necessary to enable them to support a strong, positive relationship.
Okay. Hey, I got a great question here from Megan from both of you guys online. Why should the rights attached to marriage be attached to the institution at all? Why privilege marriage at all? Aren't those who aren't married, straight or gay, being discriminated against when we attach so many benefits to marriage?
Upholding a unique and special institution and allowing it certain benefits and privileges is not discrimination. The state has a profound interest in marriage. Marriage is the means by which society propagates itself into the future, the means by which children are connected to their mothers and fathers. We only need to look at the social experimentation of the 60s to the present to see the consequences to taxpayers, the consequences to the state when we have a breakdown in families. The family is the fundamental unit of society. It's based upon the connection between parents and children. And what same-sex marriage does is sever that connection. And to say, well, because some married couples, some men and women don't have children, that therefore there's nothing special and unique about it, I think it's just wrong, and I don't think it makes a lot of sense. As a class, as a group, the mothers and fathers are unique, husbands and wives are unique, because they're the only type of union that can connect children to their biological mother and father.
Brian?
Marriage was never intended specifically for the purpose of connecting children to their parents. I mean, there are plenty of individuals that are raising children alone. Single parents are common in this country. And I think that it's actually important to attach some of the benefits that are attached to marriage, because it enables relationships to be made stronger. It provides protections for both people in the relationship. It's not just about the benefits that flow from it. It's about the protections that are there. And many of those protections come out in the instance of divorce. I mean, a same-sex couple that's been together for 20 or 30 years and they decide to separate has the same challenges that an opposite-sex couple has. And it's important to have a legal system that is able to adapt to and respond to those situations. And again, it's about the fact as well that same-sex couples are raising kids and they need many of those rights and benefits that heterosexual couples have. It's about responding to the situation that's present in society today.
We're going to try to go to Howard Bell one more time. Appropriate, it's the opening day of baseball. 3 strikes and you're out, Howard. Howard, can you hear me, man? Yes.
I don't know about that baseball reference. You know, out here it is opening day, so there is a lot of excitement.
Yankees won today, baby. It was a good one. As was this debate. We're having a good time here in New York. How are things in San Francisco?
Things are great. You know, it's interesting because I expected it to be a lively sort of audience, but believe it or not, the debaters, I think, were so effective and good at communicating their points that the audience really sat and listened very intently. It was very quiet.
That's terrific. Any feelings or reactions or anything that was vocal that really resonated a chord with anybody?
Yeah, you know, I do have a reaction definitely from one person who was trying to understand the argument having to do with the connection between, or the intrinsic connection between marriage and childbearing. Given that, so many folks have children through adoption or have children outside of wedlock, what are we really saying about what is the real connection between marriage and childbearing? And one other person even asked, what is this concept of marriage as a legal institution, is it not really just an issue having to do with the separation between church and state?
Separation between church and state. Repeat that one more time for me, Howard, please.
Yeah, so the second was, do you think marriage as a legal institution is not really, an issue having to do with the separation between church and state?
Do you think marriage as a legal institution is really an issue about the separation of church and state? Why don't we go ahead and tackle that one for the Good and Sound Fran?
No, not at all. Many people support marriage as the union of a man and a woman because of their religious views. Some support marriage as the union of a man and a woman because they understand that it's based in reason. Other people, may not have any religious views at all and support same-sex marriage. So again, the issue really is that for those majority of Americans who do have some faith, that believe that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, are they somehow precluded from entering the public square and voicing their concerns? Is it somehow wrong of them to do that? Of course not. If we look at the history of the civil rights movement, it was pastors, African-American pastors and others that led the civil rights movement, motivated by their faith. If we look at William Wilberforce in England, motivated by his Christian faith to ban the slave trade. And the fact is that today, many people from many different religious backgrounds have come together to support marriage as the union of a man and a woman. They have a right to do that. It is right for them to do that. And one of the things I'll say about this fight, in the wake of Proposition 8, I saw Mormon temples attacked, Mormons as individuals attacked. I saw a wave of licensed hatred in California, primarily directed at members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the things that motivates me to stand up on this issue is because those sort of attacks have no place in America, and our First Amendment, our first right, the right of religious liberty, must be protected, and those people that want to stand up and voice their concerns publicly, because it comes from a place of faith, they have the same rights that all of us do, and there should be no attempt to silence or intimidate them.
No, and I'd obviously like to respond to that. I agree with Brian that attacks based on one's religious faith are not appropriate in any set of circumstances, but I also don't think that it's appropriate for a 501c3 to be donating money directly to political campaigns and campaigns that are opposed to marriage, because the reality is there are plenty of Mormons out there that actually support marriage equality. There are many religious figures fighting alongside gays and lesbians supporting marriage equality, and there are many religious institutions and religions that believe that same-sex couples have a right to marry.
As a matter of law, 501c3s are absolutely able to donate to ballot measure initiatives. They've done so on both sides, I will say. Many of the Episcopalians who opposed Prop 8 donated. So as a matter of law, it's factually wrong to say that churches and religious organizations don't have the right to donate to ballot initiative campaigns like Proposition 8.
But there are limits that are set on those donations, and to exceed those donations limits is improper and wrong. And so the critical thing is to ensure that the law is being enforced and that everybody's playing by the same rules. And I think that's one of the issues that many people have with how the Mormon Church funded a fair amount of the campaign against same-sex marriage in California, and that's where the frustration comes.
Individual donations should not be classified by the religious background of those people who donated them, and it was absolutely wrong. And I think it was a travesty, an attack upon civil rights, to take those people's home addresses, put them up on the internet, and say, "Let's attack them, let's intimidate them, let's send death threats and the like to their homes." And I think that both of us have to agree that that sort of hatred has no place in our politics.
And I think we can certainly agree on that point, that hatred has no place in this debate.
All right, gentlemen. Absolutely, that is correct. Howard, you see what you started from 3,000 miles away. We're doing great.
About that.
That's all right, man. We're having a great time here in New York, and have a great time as you wrap things up in San Francisco, and safe travels home, all right? Great. All right, gentlemen, time for closing arguments. 30 seconds for each of you. All right, the issue, conceptualize it for us and summarize it. Should states legalize same-sex marriage? Brian, we'll start with you.
Marriage is the union of a man and a woman, should be protected. It is the basis of our society. It's something worth defending, and redefining it has profound consequences. If you want to read more about some of the arguments I've made, there's a great piece by Professor Robert George called What is Marriage that was just published in the Harvard Review of Law and Public Policy. Please read it. And again, even if you disagree, it's great to have a civilized debate on this subject.
And I agree with Brian on that. I think it's great to have a civilized debate, and obviously hatred has no place in this debate. It's about the legal issues and legal rights that same-sex couples are entitled to, and those are the same rights and benefits that opposite-sex couples are entitled to. As President Obama outlined to Congress, to discriminate based on sexual orientation is wrong. Sexual orientation deserves the same level of protection that gender does, and that's the direction this country is moving, and it's to protect to avoid discrimination based on sexual orientation. It has no place in our society. And marriage is a fundamental right that same-sex couples are equally entitled to.
Gentlemen, this is what the 180 is all about. Spirited debate, engaging conversation around the hot topics of the day, and you guys did a terrific job exemplifying exactly what we're trying to bring to Kaplan. So thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you.
We very much appreciate it. Brian?
Thank you very much.
Brian, the National Organization for Marriage, Go to the Hand, Human Rights Campaign, we very much appreciate your participation today. Safe travels back.